welcome back. Today we're checking out another SCP video. This video was a commenter suggestion, so thank you very much for that. Today is going to be SCP-4231 The Montauk House. If I recall correctly, Montauk was the name of a procedure to prevent the Scarlet King, if I remember. But as far as the Montauk House goes, don't know. Maybe it's where the guy who presumably is named Montauk lives, and he was the one that made the procedure for the Silent King. I don't know. That's all I got. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. This will be a long one. And find out what is the Montauk House.
SCP-4231 The Montauk House. The SCP universe is a lot of things, at different times and for different people. It's a universe that contains the inspirational, the humorous, the amazing, and the mundane, much like our own. But perhaps above all, it contains the dark. Much of what I've discussed throughout this series has been horrific, depressing, terrifying, awful, and dark.
Sometimes.
Whether or not the SCP we'll be looking at today is at the top of that list is ultimately subjective, but it indisputably contains all of those darker concepts.
Okay.
In truth, I'm doing the article a disservice by summarizing it, as it contains some really impressive writing, but I do what I do, so we'll move on.
Okay.
I highly recommend watching both of my previous videos on the Scarlet King and Dr. Clef, as this SCP connects to Clef, the Scarlet King, SCP-231, and SCP-231-7. Let's dive in. 4231 is not presented like a normal SCP document, although normal is a little relative at this point. Instead, it's presented as a series of different articles, more akin to a tale. It starts us in 1989, as a Foundation commander, Alan Hall, has just led a team of personnel into the town of North Axis, Cornwall, in southwest England. The team went in after a nearby Foundation site received a phone call in their response and dispatch office, sent through a radio signal picked up by their sweeps. That radio signal was normally only used by Foundation responders, and Hall says he had no personnel dispatched at the time, leading him to believe that the signal was of anomalous origin. The call consisted only of the sound of rushing water. With little to go on, and suspecting it was possibly just a computer error, Hall hung up and returned to work. The next day, however, the site received another call, again with the sound of rushing water. This time, Hall ordered the signal's origin to be triangulated, which led them to North Axis. Under normal procedure, this alone would not warrant any further investigation, as the signal was not coming from Foundation equipment.
Well, it clearly has something to do with water or flooding, because that's all we're seeing, and the phone calls have both been about water, so okay.
But since the signal did show abnormal background radiation consistent with unstable Hume fields, they sent a team in. I've mentioned Hume levels before, but basically it's a measurement of the state of reality in an area. Our baseline normal reality has a stable Hume level, and if a measurement shows anything above or below that, it means something is messing with reality in the area. Something or someone.
Right.
Paul and a small team set out to the small town of North Axis to investigate. On the way there, he begins thinking about his time in college when he worked at a meat packing plant. He didn't mind the slicing and the butchering, but he did mind the smell. He recalls the visceral stench of the gore that he had to continually toss into a grinder, and he remembers thinking that once he was done with that place, he would never smell that stench again. He thinks about this because as the team approaches North Axis, that same aroma of gore and death rises up, and grows stronger as they come closer. Some members of the team begin to panic at the smell, wondering how many rotting bodies it would take for the smell to reach that far. Outside of the town, they come to a halting stop due to a rotting horse carcass blocking the road. The following section explains what happened after the fact, written many years later in 2014, referring to the event as the Cornwall Incident. North Axis was a town of roughly 1,000 residents, and it had a history with the occult. The dead horse in the road is not only severely rotted, but also desiccated, drained of moisture, which is fairly abnormal. The team called for backup, the horse is moved, and they continue closer to the town. Not long after, they come across another body, this time of a desiccated man in his early 40s.
Well, the horse couldn't have been too desiccated. If you pull too much moisture out of something, you basically preserve it and keep it from being able to rot. I mean, it's how we make jerky. It's how we preserve meat and stuff.
Again, the body is moved and they continue, finding plenty more bodies. A few hours after the team went out there, another Foundation site in Ireland is contacted to send in multiple squads, presumably because the London site has already sent in a bunch.
Okay, and they need
North
more?
Axis is a quarantine crime scene, the site of the most deadly reality bender massacre in history, with 1,200 dead. 1,000 of these were residents of North Axis, so pretty much the entire town, while the other 200 were operatives from the Global Occult Coalition, part of something called the Ichabod Campaign.
Okay.
The Ichabod Campaign was a project by the GOC that resulted in the deaths of countless reality benders throughout the 1980s, and we'll learn a bit more about that later.
That sounds like maybe the Ichabod Campaign was the GOC's attempt to maybe genocide reality benders and wipe them out?
The only things left alive in the town were 6 pregnant women, a man, and a newborn baby, all in poor condition. There were signs throughout the entire town of heavy flash flooding, but the nearby lake was completely dry. This event, the Cornwall incident, is the climax of SCP-4231, an extremely violent outburst from an interaction between 2 reality benders. We'll get introduced to those 2 reality benders in a second, but the next section starts by copying some text from a GOC field manual about type greens, the term they use for reality benders. It explains how 99% of type greens go through the same developmental process with their abilities. First, they deny their ability to warp reality, trying to rationalize it in some other way. Some type greens never make it past this step, self-suppressing their own capabilities, but most go on to the experimentation phase. They acknowledge that they can warp reality and begin to test their limits, either slowly and methodically, or with a small number of rapid jumps in capability. Eventually, they will proceed to the stability phase, where they have discovered their limits and boundaries, and they learn to maintain control over their powers, including not using them. A number of type greens will remain at this step, attempting to live a normal life, only using their abilities in private and not harming others. The GOC typically does not hunt these entities down, but sadly, most reality benders proceed to the final phase, the child god state, where they become obsessed with the power they possess. They use their abilities for personal gain at the cost of others, exhibiting reduced empathy for other humans, inability to accept personal faults, and megalomania. This section ends by noting that teenage and young adult type greens will typically use their abilities for sexual purposes, which leads us into the introduction of our 2 reality benders.
I mean, it makes sense, right? If you have reality bending powers and you're 8 years old, you're probably going to conjure up a bunch of candy and video games, right? Or if you're in that developmental stage that is being a teenager, then, where your mind is very focused on these people you're attracted to. So it makes sense. People of certain mindsets or maturity level or age bracket would have different focuses if they could control reality. I mean, it makes sense.
Let me preface this by explaining that the relationship between these 2 young adult reality benders is manipulative, abusive, and unhealthy. Rather than going into intimate detail, like the actual article does, I'll attempt to summarize the situation without making things too heavy. The whole point of SCP 4231 is how wrong this relationship is, so I want to take extra care in making sure you, as a viewer, are aware of it, since I'm going to skimp on the details. The article itself comes with a warning that it contains graphic depictions of sexual assault, and that is true, but since I'd like to maintain monetization and try to focus on the story, we're going to gloss over some things. Again, I'd recommend reading the piece yourself afterwards to get the full impact. With all that being said, our two reality benders are named Lily and Francis, and it's
Okay.
Lily that's the real problem in this relationship. Our introduction to them is Lily pushing herself onto Francis in bed, with Francis both internally repulsed, but also obedient out of a perceived obligation. Francis is quiet, reserved, and submissive, while Lily is fearsome and dominant, a predator compared to his prey. Francis is confused about whether he actually loves her, as he knows this isn't right, and this isn't how things should be, but he also feels like he's supposed to be happy he has someone. As I said, an unhealthy relationship to be sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Next, we get an actual SCP document for 4231, the designation for a 3-story building in the former town of North Access, previously inhabited by Lily and Francis. It lists that Lily was 5'7", 150 pounds, 28 years old, and recently pregnant at her time of death. Her body was found in the upstairs bedroom of the building, with a single gunshot wound in her head.
Oh, okay.
Francis is listed as 5'3", 145 pounds, 27-year-old male, making him both younger and smaller than Lily was. At the time of his recovery by Foundation agents, he was under extreme mental distress, capable of speaking coherently, with numerous scars, bruises, and broken bones. He was also constantly vomiting water and blood. He shows signs of severe psychological trauma and is contained by the Foundation. As the building they lived in is an SCP, that means it itself exhibits anomalous traits,
Okay.
because of both the prolonged violent presence of the reality benders there, but also because of SCP-4317, which was initially located underneath the nearby lake and connected to the house by a passage. As I said earlier, hopefully you're already familiar with SCP-2317, but if not, a quick summary. 2317 is a primeval entity located in an alternate dimension accessible through a specific door. The entity is titled the Devourer of Worlds, and was contained in that dimension by a group of Arakeshan mystics who crafted 7 chains out of the bones of the entity's 7th bride. 6 of the chains are broken, and the Foundation has no idea how to stop the 7th one from breaking as well, which would release the entity to continue devouring worlds. While the author did not intend for that entity to actually be the Scarlet King while writing 2317, they left the possibility open, and many have subscribed to this theory. Whether or not the 2317 entity is the Scarlet King doesn't really matter for 4231 though, as what matters is that Lily and Francis were living in a house right next to the hidden door that led to 2317. What's more is that the article states that the anomalous traits of 4231 were partially created due to the activation of the door, but we'll get back to that in a second.
Okay, so as is right now, we have the 2 reality warpers, and they are living together in a toxic relationship where she is the dominant aggressor and he is the submissive person that's not really sure he even wants to be there. So, okay. And they live in a house that is also an SCP that is located next to a doorway to another dimension that possibly contains the Scarlet King. So, were they born reality benders or did they turn into reality manipulators by way of being so close to this doorway and simultaneously living inside of an SCP? So, there's a lot going on here. they live next to an SCP, they live inside an SCPs, and they are themselves SCPs. So
The building itself consisted of a top-level apartment, a ground-level flower shop, and a basement, which extended via a narrow passageway into another chamber underneath the lake. The top floor, the apartment, is where most of the anomalous qualities appear, left behind by traumatic imprinting from the reality benders. We'll be getting a short list of the effects of this imprinting in a bit, but it's extensive, and the apartment is actually studied by researchers looking into reality bender psychology, violence, and mental illness. Going through the underground passageway leads to a tomb structure dating back to medieval Europe. In this structure are 7 equal-sized cells, 5 by 5 meter stone rooms with iron doors, secured with anomalous locks. When the locks were eventually damaged enough by Foundation personnel, the doors were opened, revealing 6 pregnant women. Unfortunately, they were not normal pregnant women, and were contained by the Foundation.
Oh, I see where this is going. Okay, so this is where they got the pregnant women that end up giving birth to a bunch of other SCPs, including Tickle Monster. Oh, okay, all right. It's all coming together.
As SCP-231. Again, ideally you're familiar with SCP-231, but basically they were 7 young females, each pregnant with something quite anomalous. The first 6 ended up giving birth to increasingly horrific and dangerous threats, so the 7th one is continually prevented from giving birth through a procedure, Procedure 110 Montauk. The details of this procedure are left unexplained in the original article, left only to imagination, as being something utterly reprehensible. SCP-231 does have direct connections to the Scarlet King, at least in the original article, as the women were retrieved from a cult calling themselves the Children of the Scarlet King. SCP-4231 tells us that this was a lie, though, and that the women were actually contained in cells underneath a lake in North Access, Cornwall, right next to the door leading to SCP-4317. That door was eventually removed from under the lake and taken...
Now, I do have a question. They said that in one SCP, that the women were found and taken out of the custody of a cult. Now, in the Montauk House SCP, it says that the women were found in these cells. Now, I understand that the SCP universe is very nebulous in what is considered canon, just because of its very nature, the fact that it's just written by people and kind of peer-reviewed and passed around, and until basically things are just kind of accepted as true. Are there instances where an SCP will overwrite another SCP and that's considered canon? So in this example where they say, no, them being found with the cult was a lie, they were actually inside the Montauk House, is that generally considered canon or truth? Or is it always just left up to each individual SCP? Like, is there an actual time when one SCP overwrites another SCP and everybody just agrees with it? Does that happen?
...into a Foundation site. The last room in this tomb is filled with hundreds of different artifacts, notably exactly 500 human bones decorated with strings and fabric, 7 heavily decorated ritual altars, and elaborate carvings of a one-eyed, horned beast, believed to resemble 2317.
Okay.
Additionally, the hallway connecting all these rooms is covered in carvings depicting scenes from the Arakesh Codex, a book mentioned in the 2317 documentation that explains how the mystics contained the entity in 1894 BCE. As the house was built in 1974, and the tomb dates back to medieval Europe, it's unknown how it came to be attached to the house.
Yeah, 1974, the house is relatively new, all things considered. If it was located in a different place, I assume that the tomb was moved to a different location and then the house built on top of it. I mean, they can do that. They can move entire structures board by board and recreate them and rebuild them in a different location. They do it all the time.
The Foundation suspects that the tomb might actually be an intricate replica created by Lily based on text in the Arakesh Codex.
Yeah, it might be a replica as well.
Let's piece some things together then. There's no doubt that Lily was involved with the containment of the 6 pregnant girls, as well as the 2317 entity. If we believe that she replicated the creation of the tomb based on the Arakesh Codex, it raises a lot of questions. Where did she find the Codex? Where did she get the girls? And what exactly was her goal? The 231 document makes it clear that there were 7 girls involved, but here we only have 6 in cages. I won't get ahead of myself, and you might already know what the implication means, but let's move on. We get a short section that took place on December 2nd, 1988, around 9 months before the Cornwall incident. Lily is recently pregnant, and Francis wanders away from bed, feeling disconnected from his own body. He opens the bedroom door to find that there's nowhere else to go. The rest of the apartment doesn't exist, and he ponders if it ever existed in the first place. He is trapped. Whether physically or mentally, it's irrelevant. We then see a list of various anomalous effects present in the apartment of SCP-4231.
Okay, hit me.
These are imprints left behind by the interactions between the 2 reality benders, auditory and physical phenomena continually recreated from past events. These phenomena include audible arguments, passing insults, degrading comments, and violent outbursts, including the death of a cat. This is perpetual evidence of the abuse that Francis suffered from Lily, imprinted onto the house through subconscious reality bending. Sometimes the house itself will physically alter, with hallways extending indefinitely, or the apartment replicating itself upwards over and over for 80 hours.
For 80 hours?
The final phenomenon listed is the viewing of a couple of events, one that took place before the Cornwall incident, and one that took place years after it, in 1995.
Okay.
The first shows Lily and Francis on the beach near the lake, with the 2 about to have intercourse. The second event is from an airport in Arizona, thousands of miles away and years afterward, where Francis watches an episode of Law and Order on a TV in the bar. The episode, pertaining to sexual abuse, makes Francis realize and begin to reconcile what had happened to him. He now worked for the Foundation, but was called in every year to discuss what had happened, and he wished he could just quit and work at a Walmart somewhere. He wakes up later with fresh marks on his body corresponding to his old injuries, as a result of his subconscious reality-bending powers working on himself. Cutting back to the beach, when they go back to the house, it fills entirely with water for 79 hours before dematerializing. The next section is from a confiscated document, meaning that it wasn't written by the Foundation, titled The Curious Case of SCP-4231-B, referring to Francis.
Okay, so Lily must be 4231A.
Francis apparently had trapped himself at the top of the house with his newborn baby during the Cornwall incident to escape the floods. After being interviewed, it was ascertained that he was unaware of SCP-231, 2317, and even the anomalous imprinting on the house. When Foundation agents arrived during the incident, they ended up chasing Francis through the house for miles and miles, as he continually expanded it using his powers.
You know, I never really thought of that before. Reality bender basically turning any kind of interior environment into a labyrinth. What a great idea. You crazy stuff. I mean, you could twist people's minds in a scenario like that. That's very interesting.
Eventually, they smoke him out with sleeping gas and contain him. The author states that Francis would end up causing numerous debates among the Foundation, principally because he is something that they didn't believe reality benders could be: traumatized. He vomits water because of the flood he tried to escape from. He wakes up with self-inflicted bruises and cuts based
I
on
mean, eh, he's partially traumatized because of the abuse he suffered from another reality bender. When two people have the same power, you basically equal that out, and you go from being a reality bender to just being a regular dude. Like Syndrome said, when everybody's super, then no one is. So the point is, they didn't think reality benders could be traumatized because typically when they run into them, reality benders are the top of the food chain. They don't really experience trauma or abuse because they can literally bend reality to their whim. But when two people have reality manipulating abilities and those abilities are able to push against each other, a person who would normally not be able to feel vulnerable suddenly is going to feel vulnerable because their powers are being pushed against. And it sounds like Lily was stronger, had a stronger force of will, and by extension probably had stronger reality manipulation abilities. So she was probably able to overpower him both physically and with her own superpowers, if you will. So it actually makes plenty of sense why he could be traumatized.
previous wounds, and he exhibits traits of PTSD and dissociative identity disorder.
Right.
In
All
time,
makes sense.
he develops a completely separate personality to escape from this trauma. His new personality is the opposite of his original: eccentric, flamboyant, even inflammatory towards others, and this personality seems to have no knowledge or care about Lily, his child, North Access, or anything that transpired there.
People who can warp reality and have multiple personalities are very dangerous. We'll just point to Legion as an example.
But the trauma still exists, and Francis deals with it in different ways. During initial treatment by the Foundation, Francis asks to not be filmed, and in fact to remain completely anonymous throughout the investigation. The Foundation, being the Foundation, of course, refuses, so Francis uses his abilities to obscure his face from any form of recorded media.
Okay.
The Foundation continues to refuse any of Francis's requests for anonymity, privacy, and abstaining from physical contact. During the first 2 weeks of containment, as the Foundation continues to bombard Francis with tests and interviews about what happened, his mental condition significantly worsens. In short, they treat him more like a test subject than a person, and eventually Francis stops allowing it.
Yeah, go figure. I know they've done. I can't think off the top of my head about what SCP it was, but I know that they've done that before, where they had someone or they had an SCP that was fully willing to work with them and let them run tests until they overstep their bounds, and then the SCP was like, "Yep, no more." I just can't remember which one that was, but they've done it before.
While this does involve him using his cameras and breaking equipment, it mostly involves his new personality refusing to cooperate with any of the Foundation's inquiries and tests.
Makes sense.
He rips out IV lines and patches, deliberately insults and belittles staff, and refuses all medication and therapy to help his condition. He still suffers from night terrors and panic attacks, but as soon as any staff come to assist, he brushes them off. We see that this confiscated document was written by someone named Lady Agora, who claims that she is a sigil master, translator, and worshipper of many.
Worshipper of many. Worshipper of many. Never heard somebody say anything remotely like that. Worshipper of many. Sounds to me like this is a person who can't make up their damn mind. Pick a lane. You know, pick a lane. Science, religion. If you're going to go religion, then pick a deity or something. But this person's like, you know what?
One of everything.
Everything?
Yeah, one order of every dish on the menu.
Everything.
From her again. We then get a series of emails exchanged between the O5 Council discussing Francis.
Okay.
As expected, their tone is cold, clinical and discompassionate. They refer to Francis's outbursts as civil disobedience, rather than recognizing that they are the cause of his worsening problems.
Right. Instead
They
of
do
reaction to torture.
recognize that he has a high degree of control over his reality-bending abilities, and begin to discuss whether or not to contain him. After all, a reality bender with their powers in check could be a valuable tool. They mentioned that he had worked with the GOC as part of the Ichabod campaign under the code name Ukulele. If that doesn't ring some bells for you, then I'll assume you haven't watched my video on Dr. Clef. If it's not clear by now, Francis is Dr. Clef, or at least one depiction of him. While a lot of details about Dr. Clef are pretty fluid, there are a few generally concrete things. One is that he is anomalous. 2 is that he used to work for the GOC. And 3 is that he's a bit of a jerk. We can check all those boxes for Francis now with his new personality, but there's more to be gleaned here. It's often mentioned that when Dr. Clef was younger, he was in a relationship with another anomalous entity, and fathered a young girl, who ended up in Foundation custody. While it's generally accepted that this entity was some sort of goddess, the exact details are a little murky, partly because Clef tends to lie about a lot of different things.
Wow, there's a lot going on here. Okay. So, Francis, when he was younger, he was Dr. Clef. Later on, he met Lily, who was also a reality bender, and they lived inside of an SCP next to a lake that had a doorway to another dimension, housing another SCP. But when he was young and he was Dr. Clef, he met another anomalous entity and had a kid who is, again, presumably another anomalous entity. Jeez. Oh, okay. It's a little hard to follow, but let's keep going.
Although Clef isn't usually depicted to be an actual reality bender, 4231 reconciles this fact by claiming that Clef views his abilities as a medical disability more than anything else, meaning that he self-suppresses his capabilities. An 05 says that Francis had a really solid kill record under his belt while at the GOC, so good that it bordered on obsessive, and his later kills were pretty gruesome. This means that while Francis was in a relationship with a reality bender, he was also out working for the GOC, gruesomely killing hundreds of reality benders.
Okay, so wait. He was working for the GOC as Dr. Clef while he was in a relationship with the one girl. Not Lily, though. Lily came later.
It seems that he was taking out his internal frustrations with Lily on others.
No, I'm wrong. He was working for the GOC while he was with Lily. So that also means that he must have developed his multiple personality while he was with Lily.
The 05 says that they don't know who the abusive one was in the relationship, despite plenty of evidence proving it. They also refer to Lily as SCP-4231-1, meaning that the Foundation is assuming she was one of the 7 pregnant girls. The birth of Lily's child apparently started the Cornwall incident, again, according to the Foundation.
Which would also lend a little bit of credence to the fact that she was one of those pregnant women, seeing how the birth of her child ended in the destruction of an entire town. Okay.
Another 05 corrects the previous overseer about the abuser, telling them that Lily was pretty clearly the orchestrator of this entire thing. Another retorts that they don't trust Francis and his testimonies about what happened, because he ended up murdering Lily. They believe that it's possible Francis orchestrated this entire thing as a cover-up, including the traumatic imprinting. They suspect that Francis is playing the Foundation, but another says that if he was, they'd be able to tell, and they'd already be dead. They move on, wondering about the other pregnant women they found, and whether or not Francis was involved with their impregnation. Ultimately, they go back to whether or not to contain Francis, and if they don't contain him, then whether he has a right to his child, or to bury Lily. They decide these are issues for the Ethics Committee, and mentioned possibly looking into adoption options for the child in the Cornwall area.
We're not going to discuss the possibility that that child who was conceived of two other SCPs is also anomalous? Come on, you're not going to adoption. Get out of here.
Clef's child, of course, turns out to be SCP-166, the teenage succubus, later picked up from a convent in Cornwall, England.
Yeah, see? Adoption.
05-1 says that it seems Francis really isn't their main concern at the moment, but rather SCP-231, and they must ascertain the Montauk ritual from the Arakesh Codex as soon as possible. Let's discuss the Montauk ritual then, or rather the Montauk procedure. I mentioned it earlier as the horrific procedure carried out on the last remaining SCP-231 girl in order to prevent her from giving birth. There have been a number of different tales written about the procedure, including the idea that the procedure itself just involves reading the girl a bedtime story, and all that really matters is that people believe it to be a horrific procedure.
Right.
The next section is another confiscated document written by Lady Agora, this time about SCP-231 and the Montauk procedure. Agora doesn't jump into talking about the procedure though, but instead discusses the extreme care and attention to detail that the Foundation takes when designing containment chambers and containment procedures. She makes a note that most people don't really care about how something is contained, but rather what is being contained. Agora goes on to explain how much time and effort goes into each containment procedure, far beyond what is shown in each SCP document. And while containment procedures when presenting SCPs in these videos, they are sometimes extremely vital to understanding an anomaly.
Yes, I agree, which is why I really appreciate it when SCPs go out of their way to give me some cold, hard facts about the stuff they're talking about. That includes containment procedures. If you tell me exactly how large a room is, what the walls are made out of, other very solid pieces of evidence that I can use to ascertain information, then yeah, it helps me figure out the threat level, if you will, of the SCPs being contained. I mean, if you keep something in a tissue box by the front door, it's probably not pretty dangerous, is it? You know, rather than the thing that you got in sub-basement 32 behind 92 layers of condensed carbon, that's probably more dangerous, and I can tell that simply by the containment procedures. So I really do appreciate it when these SCPs actually give us like real cold hard numbers to work with.
SCP-2845, the deer, for example, is an anomaly with extensive and elaborate containment procedures more akin to rituals than science. Agora explains that the Foundation often bridges the gap between science and religion, measuring pig's blood with graduated cylinders in a prep room, and raising purebred black cats for the specific purpose of slaughter.
I mean, why not? If you're gonna do it, right? If you're gonna do these rituals, you may as well do it right, I guess.
She notes that the Foundation is more ruthless and exacting in their rituals than any group of worshippers in the outside world. That brings her to discussing SCP-231, an anomaly focused around the ritual enacted regularly to contain another horror.
Alright guys, we are gonna cut it there for this video so that it doesn't go too long, but we will pick it up in part 2 of the Montauk House. So far, a lot of stuff going on. We've got SCPs living with, inside of, and next to other SCPs, getting freaky, giving birth to other SCPs. I mean, we're starting to build a whole family tree here just in this one video. So this connects to all kinds of other SCPs, connects to Dr. Clef, connects to that chained beast, connects to the tickle monster and the deer and all kinds of stuff. So there's a ton of stuff going on here. Gonna go ahead and process this like I said, we will pick it up in part 2. Hope you guys are enjoying the reaction. If you are, click that like button. And if you want to see part 2, click that subscribe button and you'll be notified when it pops up. As always, guys, leave a comment down below. Let me know what other videos I should be checking out, what other SCPs I should be checking out, and we'll get to them. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching the video. Take care of yourselves and have a great day.